It's time for the 1430 Connection on 1430 WNAV and 99.9 FM, spotlighting news, newsmakers, and important community issues. Now, with this week's edition of the 1430 Connection, here is WNAV news anchor Donna Cole.
Welcome to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Cole. I have the pleasure of speaking with, once again, Jesse Iliff. His title has changed this time. He is the South, the West, and the Rhode Riverkeeper of the Arundel Rivers Federation. And thank you, Jesse, for joining me.
Sure, Donna. Always a pleasure to be on your show.
So South, West, and Rhode, we should let people know how that happened if they don't already know how that happened. Let's explain that, because you were just the South Riverkeeper in years gone by.
Yeah. So in 2015, I became your South Riverkeeper. And in 2019, the South River Federation merged with the West and Rhode Riverkeeper to form the Arundel Rivers Federation. And then at the beginning of 2020, the inestimable Jeff Holland had the foresight and wisdom to retire and leave me the responsibility for watching after the West and Rhode Rivers as well.
Okay. Did he require you to use any adjectives in front of his name when he left? Is that what?
No. Just in hindsight, I feel like he made the right move, and I certainly wish him well, and I'm glad to read his articles out there in the Capitol.
Yes, he's been doing a lot of hiking in our parks, and I enjoy those articles too. All right, so the reason why I always have you on the show about this time every year is because it is the legislative session. It has started. And because you are one of the environmentalists in the area that keeps an eye on legislation and writes legislation, we want to hear what you're keeping an eye on, working on. So let's start with that.
Sure. And, given WNAV's geographic point of locus, it is so appropriate to talk about all things Annapolis. And so thanks for having me on to do so. This year, I am keeping an eye on 15 different bills and probably don't have time to get into all of them, working on 8, and I have 3 in particular that are highest priority for the Arundel Rivers Federation. There are a couple that are relate to our area, especially because they are sponsored by our own Senator Sarah Elfreth here in Annapolis. The first one is Senate Bill 227, and that is an update to the stormwater management regulations across the state. In the Chesapeake Bay, stormwater pollution from stormwater runoff is the fastest growing source of pollution we have in our state. And this bill is an attempt to try and arrest that growth and perhaps even reverse the amount of pollution that's coming from stormwater runoff. And the way it does it is by requiring the Department of Environment to update obsolete precipitation figures that underlie some of their current regulations. The Department of Environment has promulgated many regulations about stormwater management both during and after construction. We're talking the erosion and sediment control when you see a construction site, the sediment fencing, the soil stabilization, the sediment traps, the little stormwater ponds that are on open sites, but also in the already built environment, the way drainage ditches deliver stormwater to various treatment facilities before it's discharged into the waterways of the state.
Right.
So those regulations are based off of precipitation data that is old, that is not keeping track of the changes in weather patterns due to climate change that we've been experiencing here in Maryland.
We're getting more frequent storms and more severe storms.
That's right. Over the past 20 years, the number of severe weather events, and those are defined by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration as days in which there's 2 inches of rain or more, has increased 70% over the 60 years before, 2021, before 2000.
Mm-hmm.
So the number of days we have big-time rainstorms has increased a lot. And it's not just the annual average precipitation that matters, because these big rainstorms are the ones that really flush the most pollution into our rivers and streams as compared to a long, multi-day light rain kind of gentle soak. And any gardener that you know will understand this. If you turn on the hose high pressure on your flowers and water them for 15 minutes, you're going to damage the petals, you're going to splash the earth out of the flower pots and so forth. And that's what's happening in our environment as well.
So you're hoping MDE adjusts their calculations to what we're currently seeing, and then what would that do?
MDE is the Maryland Department of Environment, and it sets the regulations for what the built environment must be able to deal with in terms of managing stormwater and in terms of managing rainfall. And so what it would do if they have to use the updated figures, which, by the way, are already, or at least shortly will be, available from the Chesapeake Bay program, which is the EPA's program devoted to the Chesapeake. They have those data already in hand, and they are working out the model that will be incorporated into this law. And if those data and those precipitation figures are included in the law, then that will require revisions to regulations, which are binding on contractors that are under construction and how they prepare their construction sites for stormwater management, but also the designers of new developments who say, okay, once all this is built and this new community has X number of lots and this much impervious surfaces like roofs and concrete sidewalks and driveways and so forth, what you would call the 1-year storm or the 10-year storm or the 100-year storm, storms that are only supposed to arise within that amount of time will accommodate X inches of rainfall. The law is intended to track the trends in precipitation, and it requires that MDE update its regulations every 5 years. Now, the last time that MDE updated its stormwater management regulations was in 2009, and the time before that was in 2000. And so
it's not every 5 years.
Because it's not every 5 years. And also those data, incidentally, they can update regulations, but they're still using data from before the regulation updates occurred. And so if you're looking at the rainfall patterns that occurred from 1950 to 2000, you're not going to be adequately planning for the future that Maryland is looking at in terms of the rainfall intensity and frequency that it has. So that's what this bill is attempting to get a hold of.
All right, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back on the 1430 Connection. Welcome back to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Cole, talking today to Jesse Iliff. He's the Southwestern Rhode Riverkeeper of the Arundel Rivers Federation. We're talking about legislation he's keeping an eye on and is starting with the top 3. So we just heard the first. Let's go on to the second, Jesse.
Sure. So another bill that is very interesting this session is Senate Bill 151 and House Bill 81. And this will make a constitutional amendment to Maryland's charter that will provide every citizen of Maryland with a constitutional right to clean water and a healthy environment. And right now, there are a number of laws on the books that act to protect our environment, but our Constitution doesn't speak to what it means to be a citizen of Maryland and what rights and privileges that confers. And this bill would require that every person, and I'm quoting from the language here, every person has the fundamental and inalienable right to a healthful environment, including the right to clean air, water, land, and a stable climate. What does that mean? You know, for non-lawyers, does that mean that you can go and sue anybody who bothers you about anything? And no, the bill is not attempting to be quite that broad, but it does provide that a healthy environment is a right as enshrined in law as, for instance, the right to be guarded against unreasonable search and seizure and things like that. Other provisions of the Federal Bill of Rights that Maryland has adopted into its Constitution.
Who are the sponsors on this?
It's Senate Bill 151 and House Bill 81. And the House sponsor is Delegate Fisher, and the Senate sponsor is Senator Patterson.
You immediately started off, does that mean you can go and sue somebody? But is that the purpose for this, to ultimately be able for environmental groups or watchdogs to sue XYZ for infringing on this right?
I would say that that is one half of the purpose. There is a dual purpose. The purpose, the first one, I think, is just to impress upon the citizens of Maryland that they are legally and constitutionally entitled to a clean environment, and that it basically enshrines the value that pollution of the common environment is, by a particular individual, is a theft. It is more or less a violation of rights of the people around you to pollute the environment that they need to live in. Mm-hmm. And facially, that makes sense to me. It also does, because in any constitution, there is the ability to take a violation of your constitutional rights to court. It does provide for persons who feel that the rights enumerated in the bill have been infringed upon to take action based on those.
Okay.
My last one is, it doesn't have a cross-file right now, so this is a bill that's just in the House, and it's really interesting. It's House Bill 322. This bill puts constraints on homeowners associations and prevents them from promulgating regulations or bylaw provisions that preclude a homeowner from doing bay-friendly landscaping. There are a number of HOAs throughout the state that say things along the lines of, your lot has to be mowed at certain height or less, and things like that. I live in a community in Annapolis, and our bylaws say that, quote unquote, weeds on any lot in the community must be cut at least once during the growing season, preferably before going to seed. And at least in theory, some neighbor of mine who felt that I had not maintained my lawn adequately could bring grievances to the HOA board and say, Jesse Iliff is tending a shabby lot in his community, and we want to see that he has to get that cut.
What was 20 years ago the norm with a beautifully manicured lawn, everybody wanted that, is not environmentally friendly. It's not the way to go.
The basic gist of this bill is trying to address the fact that perfectly manicured turf grasses are bad for the environment. Full stop. This bill is trying to help homeowners who have realized that fact landscape their property in a way that is better for the bay. And what I mean by that is allowing them to do things like put in bioswales, put in rain gardens, put in landscaping features that are, first of all, populated by native plants, because most turf grasses that are used broadly in Maryland and the United States are not native plants, but also that serve specific ecological functions. And these sorts of features can vary in size, they can vary in type, and they should, because the different soil types and topography of different properties dictates that different practices be used. But the bottom line is many HOAs currently have bylaw restrictions and things along those lines that say you got to have your lot paved in grass, and you can have maybe a couple of trees, but that's it. And they're prescriptive as to how private property owners use their property.
These bylaws and restrictions of the HOAs were rooted in the 1950s.
And the 1950s aesthetic is rooted in feudal English perceptions of who was the big shot. You know, the people with castles were the ones that would have large open areas around their manor estates, because that way, if there were an encroaching horde of, German Goth people coming to take over their castle, they'd see them coming. And
yeah, no.
over so many generations, we have come to think, well, if you want to have prestige and you want to look like, Lord of the Manor, then you're going to have this big swath of low-cut grass around your property. And there's no reason for it. It's environmentally destructive. And this bill is one that hopefully will put that to bed. Now, I don't need any of your listeners to necessarily go storming the Capitol over this bill. It passed through the House last year and was in the Senate when COVID restrictions basically shut down session, and nothing that wasn't already through the works went through. So I think this will pass, and I'm glad that it will, because it's a common sense measure that gives freedom to private property owners and will improve the health of the bay.
All right, let's take another quick break. We'll be right back on the 1430 Connection. Welcome back to the 1430 Connection. I'm Donna Cole, talking today to Jesse Iliff, the South, the West, and the Rhode Riverkeeper of the Arundel Rivers Federation. All right, so we're talking about legislation, and we've just went through your top three. Who is the sponsor for that last bill that we're discussing?
That last bill that we were discussing is sponsored by Delegate Hill.
So those are your top three, and for those that want to advocate for them or have a thing to say against them, you know who to contact now. We've given you all the sponsors. You said there's 8 that you were working on top of those 3. What are the 8 that you're currently working on?
So I mentioned earlier another bill by our local and esteemed Senator Alfred. She is working on a bill to improve the reporting of enforcement actions by the Department of Environment and Department of Natural Resources. She's working on that also in conjunction with Senator Bailey. This is a bipartisan bill, and in the House it's sponsored by Delegate Brooke Learman. Then there are regulations on what are called PFAS chemicals, which some of the listeners to WNAV might have seen a great piece written in the Bay Journal about this a couple months ago. PFAS are what are called forever chemicals commonly found in flame retardant materials, so firefighting foam, carpets, drapery and shades and things like that, curtains. And they are carcinogenic chemicals, and the piece that discussed this a couple months ago referred to how they're being found in increasing concentrations in the seafood that we eat. This bill has the support of firefighters associations and firefighters' leading cause of death across the United States is cancer.
Right.
And so whether it's all due to PFAS chemicals or some of the other nasty things that those first responders have to deal with, I think is a scientific question yet to be answered. But this at least is one area that we know there's a risk and there are safer alternatives, and this bill will start to address that outstanding problem. Another one, also speaking of human health and the environment, is coal tar pavement products. So coal tar pavement sealants have what are known as polyaromatic hydrocarbons, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs. And these are nasty chemicals that cause cancer. They are present in coal tar pavement products, and that what those are is defined in the bill, but basically you're talking about petroleum reductions, deep black, like tar chemicals that are used to seal asphalt. That would be a prohibited product. There are safer, cost-effective products on the market that will do the same job of preserving your asphalt and your driveway and so forth.
Who is it being sponsored by?
Delegate Stewart. So another one is House Bill 145 relating to the unlawful taking of oysters from aquaculture leases. Another is Senate Bill 119, the Clean Water Commerce Act. And actually, I believe that gets us to 8.
All right. Thank you for your time today and for all that you do for our area waterways.
Sure, Donna. My pleasure.
This is Donna Cole, and this has been the 1430 Connection. We will see you next week.